Hello, and welcome to the Washington Farm Bureau Update, a podcast designed to provide the latest agriculture, legislative, and Farm Bureau information. Well, hello, everybody. This is Ben Tyndall, and I am joined with Bailey Peters and Bree Elsey, and we're going to have just a little conversation now that session is over. And cue all the applause. We are entering into the interim session when legislators will now be going back to their home districts and engaging in the districts and possibly taking on their other jobs away from the legislature. But as far as the work that has been accomplished during the session, how do we keep that ball rolling? And so really wanted to have a conversation with the three of us over what does interim look like now as far as advocating for some of these big issues involving ag.
You know, Ben, I think before we even get into that conversation, you mentioned that some of them are going to be going back to their jobs. And I think maybe some of our listeners probably don't know that our representatives and our senators, they don't have other jobs. So maybe elaborate a little bit more on that for us.
Absolutely. If those that don't know, our legislature is a part-time legislature. And so it's constitutional, isn't it, Bree? That by law, in essence, they cannot have their job as a legislator be their sole job. So in theory, at least it can't be considered a full-time job. So anyway, the legislators will, many of them at least, be going back to jobs. And those jobs range from all sorts, from educators to law enforcement to construction to firefighters and first responders, things like that, just across the spectrum. It's actually quite impressive, all the different kind of demographics that our legislators come from.
Well, they can have a full-time job as a legislator, but there's a reason why we don't pay a lot, because we're actually encouraging you to have a full-time job. We want your legislature position to be a part-time position. And so people always wonder, why don't legislators make more money? And they keep that salary low because you're really encouraged to be an active citizen, to have that full-time job and not use the legislature as your full-time salary. We don't want lifers. We want this to be a periphery type occupation. I'm going to turn the tables a little bit, Ben, because as you know, we all know, you and I are both former staff of the legislature. So as interim is approaching, you probably have actually the most recent knowledge, having worked at the legislature really recently. So when your legislator goes home to district, how can people engage their legislators? How can they build those relationships? And I think actually you're probably more of the expert on the situation than anyone sitting here.
I don't know about that, but I do know from our conversation actually earlier, you brought up this incredible point that I want to make sure our members know, that really our legislators are a lot more accessible than I think we realize. That during this interim period, they go back to their home districts, they go back to maybe their regular 9-to-5 job, but they are a lot more accessible to the constituents within that district for meetings, for emails, for conversation and communication than they ever had been during session. So it's a prime opportunity. But we were kind of brainstorming a little bit some of the ways that individuals can get involved. And so kind of help me out. Maybe we can prattle them off. But one is emails and letters. They make, during session, those get kind of lumped in with the literally hundreds, if not thousands, that they might get during a day. Your letters and emails during the interim become a lot more valuable and carry a lot more weight and get a lot more kind of face time.
Right. I think I had a record of 1,500 emails in one day.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to give those handwritten letters or thoughtful emails the attention they deserve when you're just triaging the mass quantity. So during the interim, they're going to have more time to just sit down and read these emails, these letters.
They're going to have more time, and you also have a larger platform. So whereas when we're asking our members to testify, they only get to come in and usually have 60 seconds to 2 minutes to actually tell their story. But really, it sounds like the interim is a great opportunity to actually, either in person or through email or a letter, actually tell your story in full depth. What's important to you? Why is it important to you? And kind of tee up, what are the issues at hand and why do they need to be addressed?
This may sound kind of surprising, but you can totally invite your representative to go have coffee. And surprisingly, they'll often say yes. I know as a legislative assistant, I was often scheduling meetings with the legislator and constituents at a coffee shop just there in town. That was kind of her substitute office. And so we were often setting up these meetings for individuals just to come and share their story. You're absolutely right. Share something that's important to them, share about legislation that's important to them. And it wasn't necessarily crammed into the 10, 15-minute meeting, but there was a lot more informality in that. And they were able to really share their story and get to know one another. And those were some powerful times for the legislator as well.
Yeah, because as you know, during session, you're lucky if you get 5 to 15 minutes if you're really lucky.
Yeah.
During the interim, you can have coffee for half an hour. And I think what surprised me the most is how few constituents take them up on that. I mean, a lot of times you see the same constituents year after year requesting these meetings, but really the community at large, I don't think they feel like their legislator is accessible just for any reason at any time. And to really take advantage of that, to call the legislative assistant, book that time either in the office or for a cup of coffee, and you're not relegated to these 5 to 15 minutes. You're half an hour plus at that point.
Absolutely. I know one of the important things that I remember seeing was how much the legislator relied on constituents that she really saw as an expert in a particular field. And so if you as a constituent can become a resource to a legislator, that is an incredibly valuable opportunity. I remember in our legislative office, we would keep a list of constituents in our district that we could turn to if an issue arose in the legislature, or if there was an issue or a bill that came up. Hey, I need to make sure and have a list of some constituents that could give input or advice. How is this going to impact you? What is this going to do for you and your family and your field?
And like you were saying before, too, a lot of bills come from constituents. It's problems that constituents in your district face with agencies or in their small business or with their children. And the person they call is their local representative and say, is there anything we can do to try to fix this situation? And that's really where bills are born.
So now we all know that farmers and ranchers, we love coffee. But does this coffee meeting have to happen in an actual coffee shop? Or could I invite them to the farm? Could I invite them out to the ranch? Come and, see boots on the ground that I really am an expert in my field, in my literal field.
That really does happen. I can vividly remember a day where a road was washed out, and we were trying to figure out, could we procure funds to repair this road? It was a fishing spot, and I knew that constituents were going to be really upset that they were going to lose the ability to fish in this spot. So there was snow on the ground, a washed out road, and I put on my biggest boots and I hauled myself out there to look at this washed out road. So if a constituent calls and says, hey, come look, you will come look. You will take your assistant and the representative and you will go to that location. I remember taking a representative I worked for out to railroads that had been washed out. You really wanted to see the damage firsthand. If you were going to be asking the legislature for money, you really wanted to see the impact and what this was going to do to your community. So there are a lot of times we'll throw on a pair of boots and head out.
Kind of playing off of that is to invite representatives, not just absolutely invite them to your field, invite them to your farm, let them see your operation, but let them know about events in your community, to invite them to come and take part in tours or events. If there's an opportunity for them to come and speak, perhaps make sure and invite them. Don't assume that they automatically know what's going on in your neck of the woods. A lot of times they are relying on their legislative assistant who's going through the local news and just kind of trying to scan through emails and see what events may be taking place. And it's very possible they're missing some things. So be that resource and be that communicative outlet to let them know, hey, there's an event in town, and invite them.
With it being an election year and there's going to be a lot of candidates being announced, what you just said kind of brought to mind is one of our members, Rosella Mosby from King Pierce, shared during their rally that we really need to be thinking about who we elect. Is agriculture a priority? So really, I think all of this advice doesn't necessarily just extend to who's already in office, but who's going to be running for those positions, and learn their priorities, sit down with them and have coffee. It doesn't have to necessarily happen directly with your current reps and your current senators.
And candidates, I think, are the most eager to learn these things. They haven't been through the process. They haven't been a legislator for years. A lot of these issues are new, and they're anxious to learn more about agriculture and how they can be an advocate and how they can know the pitfalls. So I think, if anything, candidates are the most receptive to information like that.
Members are always wanting to get involved, and they're really excited to get involved during session, and that feels like that's boots on the ground. But I would argue and say that the interim is just as important.
Because that's the relationship building time, really. You can't come down to the campus on January 15th and expect to have all this resounding success. That relationship building happens way before, and that's where you have your local rep's phone number and you have this communication connection already established. You want to build that now because it's going to matter in January as soon as session starts.
And there's also that element of being proactive that I know working in the legislature, so many, I think I'm not exaggerating by saying the majority of the legislation that I know my member for sure was working on was constituent driven. And so these were ideas or suggestions that people from her district brought forward and said, hey, this is a bill or this is an idea that is very important to me, or this is an issue that's being impacted. I have an idea, I have a suggestion, and she would take that and run with it and craft legislation. And there was some incredible success, and a lot of people were helped because of the suggestion that a constituent brought forward to her. So I want to encourage our listeners to be bold and take those ideas or suggestions. The idea of not just being reactive, but proactive and saying, hey, are there some suggestions and ideas that you can bring forward to your legislator and see a powerful difference being made in the agriculture front? Well, I think that does it for this week. As always, we want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. And know that if you have any questions or comments regarding the podcast, or perhaps suggestions for future episodes, send us a message via email or Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, so long for now. The WFB Update is a production of the Washington Farm Bureau, the voice of agriculture in Washington State, ensuring our family farms continue to feed the world. To learn more, visit our website at www.wsfb.com.